Title reads U.S. Grant History Chat interview with Emmanuel Dabney. Rangers sit in home offices.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Nick Sacco at Ulysses S. Grant National Historic Site in St. Louis, Missouri. And it is my distinct pleasure today to be speaking with Emmanuel Dabney, who's a park ranger at Petersburg National Battlefield in Virginia. This is episode 2 of our U.S. Grant History Chat. So to kind of kick things off with Emmanuel here, I think it'd be really interesting to learn more about the operation at Petersburg National Battlefield, and perhaps more specifically, you all take care of Grant's headquarters at City Point, this really neat structure that is on the battlefield there. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Petersburg, Emmanuel, and maybe a little bit about Grant's headquarters as well?
Sure. So thanks so much for asking me to participate. Our park, Petersburg National Military Park, when it was first established, came about in 1926. So we're, getting long in the tooth now, but came later than some of the other national parks that are large landscapes that people are familiar with. We are a series of battlefields. I always say if I ever get the chance to rename the park, I'm going to call it Petersburg National Battlefields with an S, as we protect sites that cover 9.5 months of military action centered around the city of Petersburg and the control of that city, whether it would remain in Confederate hands, defended by Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, and whether it would fall to the federal forces under the overall command of Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant. For many years, the park did not have possession of the site in which Grant had his headquarters and supply depot during the Petersburg campaign. But in the late 1970s, the Epps family, who owned the land that Grant's headquarters, tent, and then later his cabin had been on, sold their home and acreage around that house to the National Park Service. So what had happened kind of in between the war and in between the late 1970s had happened kind of quickly. In the summer of 1865, Grant's headquarters cabin that he had lived in during the winter of 1864 and 1865 had been moved from City Point, now Hopewell, Virginia, to Philadelphia and put in Fairmount Park. This had been orchestrated by the president of the U.S. Christian Commission, George Stewart, and all of the furnishings as well as the building had been taken apart and shipped and reconstructed there in Philadelphia as the sort of gift to the city. It remained there with no real understanding by anyone in the late 19th or early 20th century about how to protect said building. And it didn't take long for it to become victim to souvenir hunting, vandalism, rot, and decay. In 1981, the National Park Service engaged with Fairmount Park and the city of Philadelphia officials about what to do with Grant's cabin. They agreed that they would willingly sort of let it come back to Virginia. And after an archaeological investigation, research investigation through documents as well as photographs, the cabin was reconstructed in 1983 on its original location.
Interesting. So Grant's cabin in Virginia kind of had the same experience as his log cabin here in St. Louis, where he built this log cabin when he lived in St. Louis before the Civil War. It got moved around several times. Relic hunters took a lot of different artifacts and items and even parts of the cabin itself, and then it was reconstructed later on. So kind of an interesting parallel with what's going on in Virginia and in his log cabin here in St. Louis. And with the Petersburg battlefield, you mentioned several battlefields. So I'm thinking of places like the Battle of the Crater is like one of the battles that you talk about as well, in addition to the siege.
Yes. We have a range of military operations that began sort of June 9th, 1864, then a break of a few days and kicked off in earnest on June 15th in what Grant thought would be a quick assault on Petersburg because Lee's army was not there at the time. Confederate General Pierre Beauregard had a small force of men defending Petersburg on that day. But a variety of things occurred that ended up lasting several more days. And by the afternoon of June 18th, Lee's army was now joined with Beauregard's forces in defending Petersburg. And over this 9.5-month military action, there was a series of battles. Certainly the one that people know us, I think the best for, is the Battle of the Crater in July of 1864. But that's the beginning still.
Sure.
8 more months of combat to go on. And so we certainly encourage our visitors to visit whatever elements of the battlefields that interest them, but to know that this is a long, sustained campaign that had not been kind of seen before in the Eastern Theater, and we're in a fortunate position right now that hopefully in coming years, as we've got a new legislative boundary, we'll be able to add some new lands to the park boundary, and folks will be able to actually walk on those battlefields that we previously had been able to talk about from afar, but not actually walk the ground.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that legislation. Now, I followed your work for a couple of years now online, and I know you've been working on a number of research projects. So, for example, you mentioned the Epps family. I know you've been doing some research on the enslaved people that were owned by the Epps family, and I know you've been doing some research on the Freedmen's Bureau, the sort of the social organization under the control of the U.S. Army during the Reconstruction era. So maybe you kind of speak to us a little bit about your research projects and some of your findings.
Sure. So when I got to Petersburg, which this month it's just amazing. I started 19 years ago as a seasonal employee still in high school. And, I'm sort of out in the park as I had been even as a child, as I grew up around here. I was sort of confronted with something that just didn't make sense. We had this plantation site that there was visible structures for, and then there was ample evidence about what happened at that site through the antebellum, wartime, and post-war owners' diaries that span about 40 years. And yet the only mention really of enslaved people that he owned, or at least he claimed ownership over,
Sure.
was a brief line on our site brochure, which I don't know when that was created, but my guess is sometime around 1981 or 1982. And I just started diving into these diaries because here was this evidence sort of waiting to be mined for more information. And over time, thanks to the developments of the internet, I have been excited and motivated and stayed up late at night and got up early in the morning, go to work, keep digging to find out more about these people. And so Richard Epps, no one would say that he himself was famous, but he was very wealthy. And locally in his community, he was well known. And with that wealth came his inheritance and subsequent purchasing, and those enslaved families having more children. To by the summer of 1860, he had 122 enslaved people on his plantations in excess of 3,000 acres of land. The park today only owns about 21 acres at City Point, so just a fragment of what was his. Nevertheless, the records tell us about all this stuff that's happening both within the household, outside of the household, and through work from the Works Progress Administration, who interviewed at least one of the formerly enslaved men on Epps's plantation, right up through modern researchers, and then my own research, I've been able to document at least 10 men who escaped in 1862 and joined the U.S. Navy, which was, not a discussion point prior to this. And it was kind of hard to figure out. The internet opened up that door to that. At least 2 others served. Well, one left the Navy and joined the Army, but another one independently just joined the Army in U.S. colored troop regiments. And sort of in an ironic twist of fate for them, they had left this area in 1862, and their regiments are stationed in the area in 1864, 1865. So it's been exciting through pension research. We've been able to capture these people's stories, the complexity of their stories, other formerly enslaved people who testify on behalf of these men or their widows, which I think opens up this narrative for so long that because so many Black people were illiterate prior to the war and during the war and for many years after the war, that we can't know this story. And work from many researchers show that that's not true. If you use the pensions, you can get the story. And that's sort of what I have been engaged in doing. In fact, just this morning, I found one of the formerly enslaved men who became a Navy person during the war. I found his widow had been unable to secure a pension, but there was that evidence about their marriage and about their relationship with other formerly enslaved people that had been owned by the Epps family. And many of these people, though they left the plantation in 1862, they were intermarried with one another, and so they reconstructed their households in freedom down in Hampton Roads area of Virginia, and lived next door to each other within a couple of streets from one another for the rest of their lives.
Wow. So I think this is a wonderful example of a battlefield like Petersburg really going beyond maybe the tactics or strategies or what Grant and Lee's armies were doing to really bring out sort of the human element of the battlefield and looking at enslaved people sort of utilizing their own agency to fight for freedom. In the case of some of these men, joining the U.S. military. So I think it's really wonderful that research that you're doing, and it'll be great for the site moving forward to be able to share more of those stories when people come to see the site. So I think that's great. And then finally, just to kind of wrap things up here with our last question, as you well know, the park recently got involved more deeply with the story of the Reconstruction Era with the establishment of Reconstruction Era National Historical Park. What a mouthful, but the new site in Beaufort, South Carolina. And so I'm curious about your thoughts on the National Park Service telling the story of Reconstruction, what happened in America after the Civil War. What direction do you see that playing out? What do you hope to see out of the Park Service's interpretive efforts moving forward?
Well, I definitely am excited for Reconstruction Era as a new site in the Park Service. I wish we could create multiple Reconstruction eras, whether they be managed by the National Park Service or state park system. Is this era, this period, of which there's, of course, much debate about when it started and when it ended, but this period of time definitely is worthy of understanding in different communities how things played out. And but I think that one of the things that is sort of interesting, has been interesting to me even before Reconstruction Era was established, was this notion that the National Park Service didn't have Reconstruction sites or places to talk about this. And sort of my first reaction was always, we got Andrew Johnson's home.
That's right.
And you think more deeply, it's these national cemeteries come about as a result of war and Reconstruction. How are people as a whole, the nation as a whole, going to make sense out of all of this bloodshed? And what does that mean for former Confederate soldiers' bodies? How will the nation deal with those? Because the bodies are still there, and communities obviously dealt with them in some fairly similar ways. It's, look through Caroline Janey's book on the Ladies Memorial Associations. But I think what has been the problem is that our traditional Civil War battlefield sites have struggled with how to balance what they feel like we were mandated to tell, these stories about military tactics and battles and generals, to what does it mean? And so we were missing cause, context, and consequences. And we finally now got the green light to do this in the early 2000s, and it's taken some time for people, I think, to know how to do it. And I think it's okay for people to still feel like they need some more information, but it's out there. It may take some efforts to go to the research repository, to talk to people in your community, because a lot of things have been segregated amongst people, because Black people, including my own family, have had a very different experience in the 1860s through the 1960s, and sort of 100 years of large national strife on the issues of both, race and gender, as well as the meaning of this cataclysmic war. And I am excited in that I see more sites are doing more topics, more conversations, looking at the different versions of Reconstruction, that the wars with Native American tribes out west were not some sort of something separate from Reconstruction. It's just a different version of Reconstruction than dealing with sharecropping in the South.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree. There's a lot of different directions, and there's really stories of Reconstruction, not just in the South, but in the North, in the West. I mean, really everywhere. So it's an exciting time to see more of an interest being taken in Reconstruction, and hopefully some of the efforts of the Park Service will sort of translate over into the schools as well, and sort of integrating the school curricula with what the national parks are doing too. So there's a lot to be excited about. So I really want to thank Emmanuel for being with us today. Really enjoyed hearing your perspective. And yeah, so you'll be at Petersburg, and hopefully when we reopen, folks out there can come and check you out in Virginia. And thank you so much, Emmanuel.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Thanks.